Welcome to part 3 of the Healing Powers of Tea course. Our last major section in this course will be exploring herbal formulas. This is a huge topic. Like pretty much everything in herbalism, there's really no one way to do it. I was looking for a visual image that could show the many choices or paths within herbal formulas, and I found this image. But even still, it's too neat and straight with not enough choices to fully convey what I mean. So I got some inspiration from the plants themselves. And these little leaf veins and cells are a better rendition of the complexity and meandering ways of herbal formulas. So many avenues to explore, and none of them are the wrong way. That being said, I think of herbal formulation a lot like baking. In order to be a great baker, you need to first understand the basic rules. After you get the basics, you can strike out on your own and create all sorts of unique formulas. The first step to herbal formulation, in my opinion, is understanding individual herbs well. What's an herb's taste? What's its energetics? Is it warming, cooling, drying, or moistening? What are its main gifts? What are its other virtues? How do we play with and extract that plant? Does it extract well into water? Is it palatable? And on and on and on. Many herbalists do a really deep dive into individual herbs, and it's not unheard of for an herbalist to spend an entire month or even a year focusing on getting to know one plant. A common saying is that it's better to know 20 uses for 10 plants than it is to know 2 uses for 100 plants. It's not until we really know an individual herb that we can then begin to combine it with others into a formulation. Which brings me to a question I often get. Are any herbs dangerous when combined? Nope. As long as you are using herbs that are safe when they are used by themselves, there aren't any dangerous combinations. I've also heard folks wonder if herbs sort of cancel each other out when they're combined. That's also not the case. It's just like cooking with 2 ingredients. When you blend them together, they form something new, but they don't cancel each other out. However, things can go somewhat astray when you first start combining herbs. So to illustrate this, I've chosen some condiments that most people are probably familiar with. The first is ketchup. Most of us know ketchup, and even if it's not something we like, we know that ketchup often goes with mustard. And when you see the 2 of these together, it may be on a hot dog. In some ways, you could say this is a classic Western food formula. And again, even if you don't like ketchup or mustard or hot dogs, you're probably aware that this is a common formulation. Also, you know that if you have ketchup and mustard, you probably wouldn't put it in coffee. And it's not that when you add ketchup and mustard to coffee that it becomes toxic or it cancels anything out. It's just gross. And it doesn't make sense on many levels. And so it is with the beginning formulator. Sometimes if you don't know your individual herbs well, or even if you do, when you start experimenting, you may form the equivalent of ketchup and mustard and coffee. So it's not dangerous, it's just a learning experience that is sometimes gross. So after I've just made a lot of points about herbs not being dangerous, I do want to throw in some consideration. Most herbs are incredibly safe for most people. For the most part, I think there's a greater danger in not consuming herbs regularly. Our ancestors ate a huge variety of plants and had the benefit of all of those different phytonutrients in their diet. And that's something that's really missing from our lives today. But there are some special considerations. If you're on medications or have a complicated health issue, then you want to be sure that the herbs you are consuming are safe for you. In fact, I highly recommend that you work directly with an herbalist so that together you can develop a plan that includes the herbs that are best for you. Also, at the end of your handout, I have a list of resources, and in there are some great resources for herbal safety considerations. Also, on my site, herbswithrosalie.com, I have an entire section on herbs, and there's lots of monographs in there, lots of safety information, and I'm constantly adding more information to that as well. Okay, so far for herbal formulations, I've made my point of getting to know individual herbs well as a first step. So next we move on to combining. The first concept I want to bring in is the idea of synergy. Synergy is defined as the interaction or cooperation of two or more organizations, substances, or other agents to produce a combined effect greater than the sum of their separate effects. Synergy is everywhere around us, from cellular reactions to collaboration between people and to herbal teas. Researchers are aware of this idea of herbal synergy and have done studies to look at this more closely. In this study, they looked at 5 commonly used medicinal herbs. They found that the combination of sage and peppermint produced the strongest synergistic inhibitory effects on cancer cell growth. It's a pretty cool study. It was in vitro, but really interesting looking at herbal synergy. The next step in herbal formulation is getting to know herbal synergists. So what herbs go together well? This is basically understanding the equivalent of ketchup and mustard. So here you're looking at some common herbal synergists like chamomile and mint, astragalus and ginseng, nettles and oats, and red clover and burdock. Often synergists are used as the main part of an herbal formula, and the other herbs in the formula are there to support and harmonize the main players. The next concept is that of the catalyst. A catalyst is a substance that increases the rate of a chemical reaction without itself undergoing any permanent chemical change. In herbal formulas, small amounts of herbs are used as catalysts to speed up or otherwise increase the effectiveness of the formula. So for example, black pepper is often added in small amounts to Ayurvedic formulas, and we know that black pepper can increase the bioavailability of nutrients by increasing circulation through blood vessels and specifically by warming up digestion. Mint is commonly added to formulas in Chinese medicine. Mint can relax the exterior, release tension, and allow herbs to better flow through the body. A bit of mint in a formula can also make the tea taste better. The last concept in herbal formulation is that of harmonizers. These are herbs that pull the formula together. Harmonizing herbs are often yummy herbs, and they're added to formulas to make them taste better. The most famous example of this is licorice. It's often said that licorice is the most used herb in traditional Chinese medicine because it's added in small amounts to many of their formulas. The reasoning behind this is because licorice is considered a peacemaker. It helps all the herbs in a formulation to get going. Another way we can use this concept of harmonizing is to bring balance to a formula. Often this is in regards to the energetics of an herb or formula. For example, stinging nettle infusions can be very drying for some people. So they take stinging nettle for a while and they realize, oh, my skin is really dry. My hair is dry. In that case, adding a bit of marshmallow brings more moisture to that formula. Or we can visit our ginger tea recipe again. You could just make a tea out of ginger without anything else. But adding the lemon and the honey transforms this tea into something else entirely. I see the lemon as the synergist with the ginger, while the honey helps harmonize or round it all out. So here's my guide to get you started on herbal formulations. Start with getting to know single herbs intimately. Then branch out to study herbal duos, which herbs go together well. Next, develop a feel for catalyst and harmonizing herbs. Which herbs increase circulation? How can we use herbs to harmonize a formula? When I first started studying traditional Chinese medicine, my teacher told me that the first step in formulation is studying traditional formulas. There's so much wisdom and brilliance in formulations that have been used throughout the ages. Understanding these formulas, then beginning to tweak them for a more personalized formula, is much easier than starting from scratch. And lastly, there's only so much philosophizing that we can do. So after getting our feet wet a bit, we've got to dive in, start experimenting. We got to drink those herbal formulas. We've got to take notes, perfect the process. These are crucial beginning steps to understanding formulation. And in your recipe ebook, I've included an entire section about herbal formulation, and I take you through my process of creating an herbal tea formula for sore throats. So one type of herbal formulation that we didn't talk about is the kitchen sink herbal formulation method. This is where someone takes all the herbs that are good for something, say digestion or cough, or perhaps even what's in their cupboard, and they throw all of those herbs together. So we say that they're using everything available, including the kitchen sink. For the most part, this is not an ideal way to formulate tea. These formulations lack focus, they often taste horrible, and they might not be effective. Like everything though, there's exceptions. Last spring, I went to a friend's house and she was served me this delicious herbal tea. So I asked her, "What's in it?" And she handed me this large jar filled with all sorts of herbs. And she said it was a little bit of all the different herbs that she had grown the previous year. So I immediately recognized this kitchen sink formulation, but I appreciated that what we were tasting was like the terroir of her garden. It was so delicious. So now I know that even kitchen sink formulas can be a success, but I would say it's rare. Another thing to consider when formulating is how you're going to prepare the tea. So we might ask ourselves, how are the individual herbs best prepared? So in an earlier video, we discussed how we generally steep aerial parts of herbs and then we simmer roots and barks. So we don't generally combine the two. Of course, there are exceptions, but one of my pet peeves in herbal formulation is when I see people selling herbal blends that have hard herbal bits like roots or polypore mushrooms, those hard mushrooms that we talked about earlier. Remember how I said we really needed to simmer those mushrooms for like 8 hours? Well, if you have those types of mushrooms in your herbal formula, it really doesn't make sense to combine them with things that are very aromatic and are just best steeped for 5 minutes or so. So for this example with echinacea and chamomile, echinacea is best simmered and chamomile is best steeped. So it doesn't really make sense to put them together. The other thing to consider is, what is your purpose in making the tea? Remember how I said that nourishing herbal infusions, which use hot water, are the best way to pull out vitamins and minerals from herbs. Then later I talked about using the cold infusion method for marshmallow. So you might think that these two should never be combined, but that's not necessarily true. As I was just mentioning in the harmonizing section, we can add small amounts of marshmallow roots to our stinging nettle infusion. It's not the purest or the best way to extract the mucilage from the marshmallow, but it works. You could try it yourself with and without the marshmallow and you will taste a difference. All right, let's review what we've covered so far in this course. We began with our ingredients and how it's important to have the purest water and the most vibrant herbs possible. We learned that dosage matters, and that dose refers to the actual herbal material, not the amount of water we use. And while dosage can be kind of a confusing part of herbalism, once we get a good idea of different herbal dosages, we can have some flexibility in figuring out the best dosage for the person and the situation. We looked at many of my favorite tools for making tea, with the understanding it could be as simple or as complicated as we want it. And we looked at how to prepare different herbal teas for different purposes and for different herbal parts. So for hot water infusions, we looked at quick teas, nourishing herbal infusions, decoctions, and we also looked at cold water infusions using fresh aromatic herbs or herbs high in mucilage. And lastly, I demystified herbal formulation by breaking it down into smaller steps, which began with getting to know single herbs, learning which herbal duos go together, and the importance of catalysts, harmonizers within a formula. So to close out this presentation, I want to talk about discovering your perfect cup of tea. Did you know that you can actually buy gadgets that promise to make a perfect cup of tea? The last one that I saw made the headlines, only cost $1,300. But there's really no such thing as pressing a button and making that perfect cup of herbal tea. The perfect cup of tea comes from experience. It comes from making tea all the time, enjoying the process, and further refining your choices until you get it just right for you. That perfect cup of tea is a process, and it's a unique experience to everyone. When people first start making their own teas, it's not uncommon for some of those teas to taste bad. I admit that I still unintentionally make bad tasting teas, but luckily for my husband, I make far fewer bad tasting teas than I did as 15 years ago. But this is part of the learning process. I've given you some experiments in your recipe ebook, and those will greatly add to your herbal tea making toolbox. Things like comparing the quantity of herbs in tea, using varying steeping times. Those things will greatly enhance your understanding of how herbs work and how they taste. I also have some more suggestions for you. Making tea is an important foundational part of herbalism and one that doesn't always get the attention it deserves. So, as I said in the beginning, my hope is that this course really inspires you to make tea a daily experience for you, whether you're relying on it for your health or simply for pleasure. One idea is that you can try one new herbal tea per week. Try using different herbs, different preparations. Another idea is to find a favorite tea and drink it daily, perhaps tweaking it here and there. And this helps you to form a strong daily habit of drinking tea. Or you could choose one herb a month and make teas every day with that herb. And from there, you could try 2 herb combinations and keep expanding from there. I highly recommend journaling your tea experiences. You've got to write down your favorites. I can't tell you how many times I was sure I would remember a particular tea recipe, but then I just forgot it later on. And lastly, consider sharing your herbal tea explorations with others. This could be as simple as sharing some tea with your friends and family, or you could have more formal tea parties. A friend recently told me that she's a part of a group of women and they meet up to drink herbal teas, they celebrate the season, and they offer support to each other. You could start with your own version of this in your community, because small actions really lead to big changes. And I love to imagine a growing number of herbal enthusiasts hosting tea parties across the world, giving people a chance to enjoy the benefits of tea in the company of a supportive community. Herbalist Marilee Wint says, "The earth speaks to me in steam rising from a cup of herbal goodness. With the first sip, sometimes I get to the root of the problem. Other times, tips on how to bloom in life. Be still, listen to the steep, and go deep." Thank you for joining me in this course. Here's to many more cups of tea.